The Detroit Pistons have made a hire. A new president of basketball operations is set to be hired by the Detroit Pistons. Here today, Cameron and I are going to check the report and figure out what is going on with the Detroit Pistons. And Cameron, I'm real interested because this is a situation in which the Detroit Pistons are coming off the worst season in franchise history. And before we talk about the actual hire, potentially, of Trajan Langdon, I want to get your sense. What was it like for you watching and being a part of the Pistons community? Because I see you out there. You go to a handful of Pistons games. I'm involved, obviously, running the Detroit Sports Podcast, paying attention to everything going on. But once it went south, things were quite difficult to maintain interest in a basketball team that struggled to shoot offensively, couldn't make a lot of threes. And it was just a tough year because they were in a lot of games, but then would collapse in the fourth quarter. And there were elevated expectations to at least get into at least the mid-30s in terms of win total when you hire presumably what you would call one of the best basketball minds in the NBA in terms of coaches in Monty Williams. You paid him as such, as a guy that potentially could do some things. But once it went south, it just seemed like a basketball team that was really struggling on a lot of fronts to have confidence, to win games, to close out games, to play defensively with the effort that the coaching staff wanted. What was it like for you watching a 14-win 2023 season?
Yeah, John, first and foremost, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to chat about the Pistons with you today. But yeah, I mean, you said it the best. I think this past season for the Detroit Pistons was nothing short of a dumpster fire. Obviously, they had the record-breaking losing streak. You had a number of injuries. You had the coaching struggles with Monty Williams. I mean, the Pistons in the past couple of years, everybody has called the Pistons sort of that irrelevant franchise. And I think they lived up to that this past season with obviously the 14 wins. And I can tell you, I went to the first game of the season, the home opener, and they ended up winning that game. And I remember looking at my friends and saying, this is the year. We're finally going to turn that corner. We're going to be good. You've got a fully healthy Cade Cunningham. You've got a great coach. You've got Jaden Ivey in year two. And I just thought, like, man, this is going to be our year. And very quickly I realized, obviously, it was not the year. And in fact, it was just the opposite of that. And so it was a struggle. It was really difficult to watch the Pistons. Obviously, they had a number of late game collapses. They got blown out a number of times. They statistically put up some of the worst stats in terms of shooting, in terms of defense. And there is so much to clean up. And I think one of the things that Tom Gores and Troy Weaver said in this offseason is, hey, we want to hire a president of basketball operations to take control of this thing. This is somebody that GM Troy Weaver would report to. So we want to hire a guy to come in and take control of this thing and clean it up. And, obviously you said it. That's what they did this week, tentatively offering that deal to Trajan Langdon. So it'll be really interesting to see where they go from here. And, the way I look at it, John, is honestly, how much worse can you do after last year? I'm hoping that this is the domino that falls, that hopefully they start to turn it around going forward.
Yeah, it's a real struggle. Look, we're going to talk about Trajan Langdon in a few minutes here in regards to what his role will be, what he could do, the early decisions that he's got to make. Look, I know of him from his great shooting prowess back when he played collegiately at Duke, being a Michigan State fan. That was around the time I was in college. So everybody that knows college basketball knows of Trajan Langdon and what he can do. But he's made his way up the ranks in regards to the NBA and scouting and running a basketball team. But now this is a different animal. And before we start talking about the potential hire and everything like that, look, with the Pistons, it's a little bit tough because to me, and I'm interested to get your thoughts, the Pistons right now have a big credibility issue in that one of the factors that is concerning to a lot of Pistons fans, myself included, is ownership. It led by Tom Gores doesn't seem to kind of have a clue in regards to kind of how to put together a winning basketball team. It's clear, it's evident based on the record that everything has failed. Nothing has worked. And many people thought, okay, bringing in Troy Weaver with the ability that he had to scout and the way in which he put together that OKC team, they thought that, okay, maybe he can bring that level of analysis to Detroit. And it just hasn't worked out. Right from the get-go, his first draft really was a flop, and you passed on a player now that people are seeing succeed in Tyrese Halliburton. And when you pass on that, it's just a daily, when you see that and the stories and what he's been able to do, it's just a constant kick in the pants that, hey, you missed out on some talent, and the drafts just haven't been anywhere near where they need to be. And so you look at Tom Gores and you realize, okay, when people question, hey, what's going on with the Pistons? Why are they so defunct? What's going on? And people are debating and discussing, well, it's not really all Troy Weaver's fault. He doesn't really have the power to go out and get what he wants. He's kind of just doing his thing, and he's got to deal with so many people in order to make decisions. So that's kind of the hallmark of bad ownership, is when you got too many cooks in the kitchen and you don't let the people in charge run and do the things that they want. So Troy Weaver, in and of itself, if that's the case, that's also a knock on him. If you're going to stay in a situation in which you have no power and everyone's blaming you for this defunct roster and the way the pieces don't fit. So if it's not your fault, then, hey, you need to speak up, or you need to work toward changing a defunct, system that's going on in terms of the hierarchy. But at the same token, now when people ask those questions, what's going on with the Pistons? Then the name that keeps popping up is Arn Tellem. And what people are saying and what's being reported and discussed is, hey, wait a minute, what's going on over there? Is Tellem just really just hiring a bunch of his family members and running the Pistons with a system of nepotism that is just going to find and target people that he represented in the past or that he has former relationships with? Well, when you dig into it, that's what's going on. Trajan Langdon has a relationship with Tellem. So clearly, Tellem has a lot of power within the Pistons organization. And you don't hear as much, but the whispers are getting louder. Why is Tellem part of this organization? Everybody, I think, when that season ended and it was a 14-win disastrous year, if Tom Gores understood what was going on, every single person involved in that front office would be walking out the door. You know me, Cameron, if that was what was going on, and I sit there in my office and I see embarrassment. I see everybody talking about me in a disrespectful manner. I see, and I don't know, I'm going to ask you, were you part of the sell the team chants that were going on out there at LCA? If I'm seeing that, I'm not sitting idly by and going, Arn, what are we going to do here? Give me more of your ideas. I'm going to be like, Arn, hit the road, Jack, and everybody with you that you have your name to. Everybody, give me your list of everybody you emailed, and they're gone too. I would start, it would be me and nobody else. And I'd start from scratch because this has been a complete embarrassment. Arn Tellem, I think, is way too powerful in this organization based on the results. I don't believe an individual in the front office with that track record should continue to be making decisions. And so that's why I think a lot of people early on are upset regarding the Langdon hire, is because, hey, if Arn Tellem is an individual giving input, then look, man, this is probably a situation in which is going to struggle to succeed.
Yeah, John. I mean, I think point blank, the Pistons really should have cleaned house. And I don't know if that starts with Troy Weaver, with Arn Tellem, and works its way down, but you should have cleaned house. You should have let everybody go, started from scratch, bring in a whole new coaching staff, a whole new front office, a whole new analytics team. I think that's what needed to happen. And I think I speak for a lot of Detroit Pistons fans and pundits when I say we're disappointed that didn't happen. And so I think the hire of Trajan Langdon is lackluster. I mean, you said it best. He's already got the relationship with Tellem, so I think that played a factor into him getting hired. But honestly, they should have looked at external candidates. I know one of the names that was floated around was Bob Myers, who was the former general manager of the Golden State Warriors. And then the other candidate that they were pursuing was John Horst, who is graduated from Rochester University here in Michigan, and the Bucks denied the Pistons permission to talk to him. So it sounds like the Pistons tried to pursue some interesting names, but ultimately settled on Langdon, which to me, it's not a sexy hire. It's not what I would have wanted, and I don't know what kind of results it's going to yield. But in terms of your other point about Tom Gores, I mean, almost every game I went to this season, you had the fans whatever fans were in the building were chanting, "Sell the team, sell the team." And I was part of it. I mean, when you have an owner that is as careless and as clueless as Tom Gores, it's hard. It makes basketball hard to watch because I think Gores is the type of person who has very little knowledge about the game of basketball and the analytics and the statistical data that goes into it. And he's just letting everybody else make the decisions. And when you've got people that have a proven track record of not really knowing what they're doing, then you see what happens with the Pistons. And that's exactly what we got. And so I don't know if Gores needs to sell the team. And I think as for Troy Weaver, he did take a lot of the blame, but I don't know if you can pin the blame on him 100%. I think it's just as much Arn Tellem, like you said. I think it's just as much Tom Gores, and I think it's just as much Troy Weaver. I mean, Troy Weaver has flopped on some of the draft picks. I mean, historically, the Pistons have a poor track record of drafting players as it is, even going back to the Joe Dumars days. But Troy Weaver hasn't been much better. I mean, you look, like you said, you missed out on Tyrese Halliburton. You missed out on guys like Devin Booker back in the day. And so the Pistons are just this laughing stock of the NBA because no matter who they bring in to be their GM, they never seem to get the draft right. And so I think that for that reason, Troy Weaver deserves a lot of that blame. And Killian Hayes is a perfect example of that. You bring him in with all this prowess. He's this great French point guard. And middle of the way through the season, he gets released. And then just chalk that up as another failure of a drafted player. So I think the Pistons have a whole number of issues in that front office. And really, again, what they needed to do is just clean house. And I think that because they didn't, it's not out of the realm of possibility that these issues continue into next year and beyond.
Why did you go to so many games this year? After the swoon, after they took a dive and you saw clearly the issues, the pieces don't fit together, the injuries that ravaged the lineup at times, the inability to shoot, the difficulty closing out games, the unwillingness to commit defensively for long stretches of time, the refusal of Monty Williams to put in lineups that many people thought would be successful earlier, where Monty Williams would come out to the media and explain things and people would be like, okay, this is kind of a direction we want. And then in the game, it wouldn't happen. And everybody would get frustrated and be like, wait a minute, he just was saying on television he was thinking about a different rotation. And then nope, it didn't happen. I think that maybe there's some players that he alienated right away. There's some question marks regarding the use of Jaden Ivey and how he's been used. There's question marks still regarding can Ivey and Cade play together. There's question marks regarding who is the focal point of this basketball team. And so you recognize too that, wait a minute, Cade Cunningham, yes, is a player that is eligible for a mini-max contract, but he also had a stretch there where the turnovers got out of hand and his decision-making got to be questionable. And you looked at it and you said, where's the coaching? Where's this team getting better? Where's the development? And it was frustrated. And then in the midst of all the nonsense where nobody's talking about the Pistons, there's Cameron sending me pictures. I'm here at the Pistons. And I'm like, why? I sent you several messages. It's probably like, why are you there? What kept you going? I respect your fandom, but at some point I would have just been like, you ain't getting my money at all.
Yeah, John, that's interesting. So a lot of the times it was just the opportunity to go and a lot of times it was free tickets. I had gotten some tickets for Christmas from my parents and one of the nights that they had was the Eastern Michigan theme night. And obviously being an EMU alum, I went to that and I went exclusively for the crew neck that they were giving away. So aside from that, I really don't know. I mean, it was something to do, but I distinctly remember walking out of LCA every game that they lost feeling extremely disappointed and just like, why did we even do this? But I will say there was one game against the Nets that they ended up coming from behind to win. And obviously it doesn't matter, but that was probably one of the better Pistons wins that they had throughout the season. So, if I could give you a small win, it would be that one.
Yeah, no doubt. And that's what a true fan is. And I respect you for saying that. Look, you're a Pistons fan. You wanted to talk about the Pistons, and you're always in my ear saying, hey, let's talk about them. And I'm like, okay, you know what? When there's an important story coming up now, maybe we'll talk about it more. You seem to be very much in the know and knowledgeable about the Pistons, and you care about the team. And look, when people say, oh, the fan base is negative, it's only because they care about the team. They don't want to be the laughing stock of the NBA. The Pistons are a proud franchise. I remember Isaiah Thomas when I was a kid. We went to the Palace of Auburn Hills for I don't know if it was because I had great attendance at school in elementary, or I wrote something, or I had good grades. But the elementary school I was at took me to the Palace of Auburn Hills, and Isaiah Thomas shot around with some teammates. We had they had a talk with kids talking about the importance of education and being a good person and all that. And it was really cool to watch the Pistons. That's how I grew up. Part of my Detroit sports fandom was staying up late watching the series that took place out on the West Coast in '88 with the Lakers, and then all the failures, and then finally coming back to win the title, and then having back-to-back championships. I was a young kid, so to see that and then to going to work, Pistons really embodied everything that everybody here cares about. Hard work, a bunch of guys that weren't considered superstars. That 2004 season is magical. When you went up against the big bad Lakers with Shaq and Kobe, and you went out there in the 5-game sweep that everybody remembers and talks about, it's a great time. It was a great opportunity there with Joe Dumars as they got back to the Eastern Conference Final for 7, I think, consecutive seasons. And then after that, it nosedived, and maybe highlighted by the Darko pick there, that maybe if it had gone differently, you could have actually won more than one NBA title. But since then, really, since 2004 and that run of games, maybe it was Robert Horry was the dagger to the organization being left open. Whatever reason, they just haven't been able to get back. And so many failed eras. We joke around with the John Kuster era, which was a disastrous, the Villanueva free agency signings that was terrible, and Ben Gordon. We got all this money and let's get 2 guys that did not deserve those big, hefty contracts. And then you move on to Stan Van Gundy and the fact that he had his hands tied behind his back, and you're just like, wow, this is something that the more they try, the worse it gets. And it's highlighted by the culmination of the Troy Weaver era, which has been a complete flop, a complete disaster. And you recognize that, hey, when you start drafting all these individuals that don't have a history of shooting, I mean, Asar Thompson, great defensively, but he can't shoot. And the NBA, you have to recognize that, hey, wait a minute, this is a high offensive production league. These guys aren't buckling down to play defense. If it was hard to sell defense in 2004, how the hell are you going to sell it now, where everybody wants to play ISO and take open shots and make threes and dunks and do those kind of things? And rebounding and defensive effort is not something that is sexy and sold to a lot of these young players, and they don't want to do it. But you go out there and you focus on a lot of, I think the biggest thing with Troy Weaver was too many reclamation projects with Wiseman and guys that, okay, they're good players, but they're not players that are, when you put them in a mix in a playoff series, you want to take that lineup that you had a year ago or 2 years ago and put it up against the Pacers. They'd whip your ass in a 4-game series by 10 every single game. And it's just really, really disappointing to where this has gotten. And so now you're at the point where, okay, Tom Gores is like, all right, okay, I waved the flag. I need somebody to come in. But I think the names that you talked about, probably a little bit better than Trajan Langdon. But the name that I think people caught wind of because of his demands was Connolly from the Timberwolves. And you realize, wow, look at the way in which they've come up. They've been strong. And it's just really something where you go, man, he wanted $15 million a year. That probably was an asking price that was too high. But unfortunately, because of the fact the Timberwolves are having playoff success, that it would have just been probably a timeline that would have made it tough. And probably an individual that's in a position where you're working with the Timberwolves, and Edwards, who's now becoming an NBA superstar. If you looked at it, and it was funny, before we recorded, I was thinking, if I was going to go down there for the Langdon presser, the question point blank I'd ask him is, why would you come here? You're with the Pelicans. You have a quote unquote superstar that is, still trying to take those next steps to have playoff success. why would you come here? Like, this is almost an expansion team. Why would you come for this opportunity, no matter what they gave you in regards to compensation? This is one of the toughest jobs in sports. And I'd be curious. I mean, probably give this standard answer. It's a storied franchise. The opportunity to restore the floor would be amazing. You'd be like, okay. But I look at it and I say, I'm not going to pan the Langdon hire just yet. I do look at it sideways because Arm Tellem is part of that process, and obviously, clearly, there's a tie there. But I look at it from this point of view, okay? People say, well, he's well respected, and he's an individual that's worked his way up the ranks. Well, in this day and age, people get respected for a lot of reasons that don't have to do with consistent winning. Langdon and his record has not produced a winning playoff series. They get to the playoffs, which is great, but they don't make no noise. So why would you be respected? I would not use that word. I would say maybe he's emerging. He could continue in his role. I think he should have stayed there and saw the job through. I don't think his work, based on the stuff that he did with the Pelicans, would allow him to take a step up in his career. I think he should have stayed at that role and worked the Pelicans into a situation where they could be winning in the postseason. And then the biggest knock is from people that look at it like myself and go, oh, Langdon is associated with hiring Stan Van Gundy after he flopped in Detroit. That's on your resume? Oh, no, you don't want that on your resume, that you were a person that sat across from Stan Van after his disaster, his run here, where he gets overshadowed by the owner and has to work with Blake Griffin, and he was way past his prime at that point. Still gave effort, still was a talented player, but was not somebody that needed to be brought here to Detroit at that time. And it was just a, home run swing, and it just didn't work out. And so to me, I think that Langdon is in a position where he's got a lot to prove. And I think that when I look at the hire, I don't think he deserves the opportunity, but if he's given the opportunity, if he's supported, if the shift is now, okay, it's now Arn Tellem's situation, he runs it, and we blow out everybody that doesn't respect Arn Tellem, and you remove all the cooks in the kitchen. Let's see what Arn puts together, because his working relationship with Troy Weaver didn't seem to produce much. And when I see it, I say, okay, Langdon doesn't have a track record of championship success. When you look at the Lions and Brad Holmes, at least you saw an appearance in the Super Bowl. You saw effective use of number one picks. You saw a player in Aaron Donald come out of nowhere and become a superstar. That's what earns you respect, not being a guy that, puts together a roster that can win 43 games and end up in the postseason. That doesn't do much. Hey, do you consistently win? Do you outmatch? Do you outwit other NBA teams? Do you come out of nowhere and win a title? That earns you a little bit of credibility, a little bit more than, hey, I used to work with Arn Tellem and we have a working relationship, so now he's going to give me an opportunity. That's where I think I have my biggest question mark. What are your question marks, and what are some positives we can take away from this hire of bringing in a new president of basketball operations?
Yeah, John, I think you make a lot of good points. You really hit the nail on the head. First and foremost, there were a lot of better names that the Pistons could have pursued, and it's a little bit head scratching why they maybe didn't, especially Connolly in Minnesota. Like you said, they're having playoff success. They've seen a lot of good players go through that organization and start to develop. And so for me, that's somebody that is respected, and previously, if I'm not mistaken, Connolly worked in the Nuggets organization, and, we saw what they were able to do last year. So I think that is a name I would have wanted. Definitely the hiring of Langdon is a little bit head scratching because he just doesn't have that reputation and that background of developing teams, developing players, playoff success, playoff wins. And I think that, to your point about, why would you come to Detroit? It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And so I sort of feel like if that's the best you can do, then I'm not convinced. But I do think that we will have to wait and see. I'm willing to give it a chance, and maybe we're wrong, right? Like maybe he turns this thing around and we're a playoff team and winning a playoff series in 3 years or less. And that would be great, but it's really too soon to say. So until we get some actual results from him, I'm going to wait on my judgment. But I think right off the bat, it is a lackluster hire. And so I'm not really sure what to expect. And like I said earlier, I don't think the Pistons are going to be any worse than they were this previous season, but I don't see them taking a monumental step forward either, especially if you do retain that core group of guys, your Cade Cunningham, your Jaden Ivey, your Asar Thompson, your Simone Fontecchio, like that's going to be the core group going forward. And really, like, unless you have a bona fide superstar, or in today's NBA, the whole big three mentality, I just don't see the Pistons making any giant leaps forward, or giant waves going forward. And so it'll be really interesting to see. I just think in the early stages of this hiring, like, I'm just not impressed. I think they could have gone in so many different directions, and being that they went this way, it doesn't grab me, And so, and I want to speak to your other point a little bit. I think just historically, the Pistons have just had this poor track record really since I'm 26. I grew up on the days of the going to work Pistons, the Chauncey Billups, the Rip Hamilton, the Tayshaun Prince. Like, that was my era of Pistons basketball as I grew up. And that's when I really started to develop my fandom. And so, being that we've had one playoff appearance against the Cavs, I think it was in 2016, and couldn't even win that series, it's been really, really hard to be a Pistons fan, as you can imagine. And so I want nothing more than to see this franchise succeed and to see them take steps in a positive direction. But I think as long as they continue to make moves that either are not that appealing, or just don't generate those results, I think they're just going to be stuck in neutral. And I felt that way about Troy Weaver. I sort of feel that way about Langdon. And I felt that way about Monty Williams. If you recall, Monty Williams didn't want to come to Detroit initially until they paid up. And so, money talks, but money doesn't always lead to results and victories. And so I think it's an interesting time for Pistons basketball as a whole. But I'd be lying if I said, like, hey, they're going to turn this around and things are going to be successful and it's all sunshine and rainbows. Like, John, I just don't see it. It's going to take some serious overhauls and bringing in different players and bringing in different personnel. And the current players are going to have to clean things up and improve. And maybe then we get somewhere. But until then, we'll see what we get.
Okay. Do you think that Trajan Langdon would have some inroads to potentially bring Brandon Ingram here? You hear a name that potentially he's tied to and has that relationship with, that he could bring here, because the Pistons do have some money to give. And look, who would take the dollars to come to the Pistons? You got to be a little bit desperate, or you got to overpay in order to come to a situation like this. But there are some free agent dollars that Langdon and the staff he puts together could throw at an individual. Do you think that a potential first look would be, okay, bring Ingram to Detroit and we can start from there?
Yeah, I like Brandon Ingram. I think he was a solid player early in his career with the Lakers, and he's been pretty steady in New Orleans. And so I wouldn't be mad about that, especially if you do have the free agent cap to bring a guy like that to Detroit. If I'm Ingram, I'm only coming to Detroit if you pay me, because otherwise there's not really a reason to go. But I wouldn't be mad about it. I think he's a guy that's sort of been in the league for several years. He's a veteran presence. He's a good scorer. He can play some defense. So I personally wouldn't be mad about that. I think getting players with sort of that reputation is the first step to establishing yourself and getting back on that path to success. So if you give me Brandon Ingram, hey, I'm not complaining. I think it's a heck of a lot better than what we've got right now. So yeah, I would definitely take that, John. And I think with his relationship with Langdon, maybe that's the way to get his foot in the door. So I would not be mad about that at all.
All right. And with our last couple minutes here, it's the talk that everybody is debating. Whose team is this? Is this Jaden Ivey's team? Is this Cade Cunningham's team? Do they need to break up the trio right now? Because if you look at it, everybody will have the debate. Okay, is there a player on the Pistons that's untouchable? Is it Cade Cunningham? Is he the face of the franchise, being the former number 1 overall pick? You see now that, okay, he was able to have a little bit better season this year coming off of the season prior where he was injured. You now realize, okay, he's got some tools to develop. He still has a ways to go in regards to his total overall development, but you can see the makings of a real solid NBA basketball player. I don't think he's going to be a franchise-altering player where he can just single-handedly carry a team, but you look at it and you say, well, okay, Cade Cunningham has a lot of the intangibles that you would want for an NBA team, but it doesn't seem like it meshes well with everything else that's on the roster. So would you, if you're a GM or you're in charge, would you trade Cade Cunningham for a first round pick and move on? Or do you say, because look, you still are gambling that, hey, he walks into your office and says, I don't want to be here anymore, signs a deal and says, I want out. I'm demanding a trade. This organization's going nowhere. Or do you say, hey, I stick with Ivy and trade Cunningham? Or you say, I'll take Cunningham and Duren and build around those two? Because outside of the top three, yeah, you have a bunch of role players, but not a lot of guys where if they were departed, you'd be like, oh my God, it devastates your franchise. How would you handle right now breaking apart the Pistons? Would you trade Cade Cunningham if the right offer was made?
Yeah, John, I think that's an interesting point. So I do think that Cade Cunningham is the face of the franchise right now. To answer your question, I would not trade him. I don't think he's necessarily untouchable. I do think that if the right offer came along, or there were some picks involved, or you got a really established bona fide scoring guy in the league, then I think that the Pistons would seriously consider it. But I think that right now he's your franchise player. He's your number one pick. I agree with you in that he's not going to be a franchise altering player like your Steph Curry or your Chauncey Billups back in the day, but he does have a lot of the really good tools. I think that there is some development that's still needed, and it really did hurt that he had missed that full season a couple of years ago because we weren't really able to see him in action and see what he was able to bring with a full year under his belt. And so I think that he did take a big step forward as a leader this year. I think that the guys on the team respect him and like playing with him, but I do have some concerns about his ability to mesh. And I think that with that, he needs to continue to develop his leadership, continue to develop a relationship with the coaching staff, and continue to clean up some of the issues that he had last year, namely the turnovers and some of the shooting woes that he faced. And so I think if he can do those things, then yes, I could see Cade Cunningham sticking around. But in terms of Jaden Ivey, he's somebody I really like. Jaden Ivey, I liked him at Purdue. I really was over the moon when we selected him, and I think that he's a solid option. I don't agree with having him come off the bench and being your sixth man. I think that Monty Williams severely misused him this past season, and so that's going to have to change. I think that he's a starter. I think that he's proven that. He's a good shooter. He can play some defense. He's athletic. So I would really like to see this tandem of Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey work. I don't know that breaking it up is a much better answer because I don't know who you get in return realistically. And then I agree. The rest of the team is sort of just role players. Nobody that is really severely would make a difference whether you had them, whether you didn't have them. I think Duren is maybe the next closest, but even Duren doesn't scream like Ben Wallace to me. You know, like I think you could live without him. And obviously the Pistons did this past season as he faced some injuries and missed a handful of games. But I think, just going back, I think Cade Cunningham is the unquestioned leader of this team, and I would like to see him put it all together. And I think give him another 3 seasons to really develop, and I think we'll be getting the best version of him. And then I'm hopeful that he sticks around. I'd love to see him stay in Detroit long term, but again, if the franchise doesn't turn it around and doesn't make those improvements, it's difficult to say what happens. I mean, and I think if you do lose Cade Cunningham immediately, it sets you back 5 years in your terms of your development, in terms of establishing that culture, in terms of getting your franchise guy. I think if you lose him immediately, the Pistons go, plummeting back down to where they were. And so I would like to see Cade figure it out. I'd like to see him put it together, and I really would like to see him have success in Detroit. That's what I'm pulling for, John.
No doubt. I enjoyed the talk. I think that it's good to check in with the Detroit Pistons every so often, even though they are frustrating. It's an organization that at least now is trying to make the next move to try and get out of the big hole that they've dug themselves, especially with everything going on. So we'll see how this plays out. We'll react to the Langdon first presser when he officially gets hired. And to me, the first move he's got to make is Langdon's hired. 24 hours later, Troy Weaver's fired. That's the first move. If you don't fire Weaver within 24 hours, if you pull this, I need to evaluate everything. You don't need to evaluate squat. You can see Pistons are irrelevant. They lose. They stink. They're in the top 5 every year. So you realize, hey, there's a reason for that. And part of the reason is Troy Weaver. So if you need more than 24 hours to decipher that easy decision, it's a layup. Meaning, walk in, sign your name. Okay, Troy Weaver's gone. Bring in somebody you trust that can't do no worse than whatever that era will end up being looked at as. It's going to be looked at as a disaster, a time that really set the franchise back. Now they're rebuilding a rebuild. And whew, I'm ready. Half an hour is enough to talk about that Pistons franchise. Thanks, everybody. Check in with the podcast network at Detroit Podcast. Make sure you follow Cameron, CamrenClouthIer, on Twitter. He's always doing great work behind the scenes as well with video. And man, okay, got some basketball knowledge. Maybe we'll do this again with a little bit more regularity as our schedules align and we figure out what's going on with the Pistons. If they restore things, maybe we can talk about them a little bit more. Hit us up. Let us know what you think. You like the hire? You don't like the hire? Let us know. Hit us up at Detroit Podcast. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. We'll find you guys again soon.